Hi, I'm Caroline Beckett and I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea, and I'm currently still working from home.
I'm Andy Griffiths. I train people for the Church of England in East London and Essex, and I'm working from home as well. And together, we
We
are
are
at a
at a distance.
distance rethinking Christian leadership. So here's a story. About 3 years ago, having been a vicar for 12 years, I started a new job training new ministers for the Diocese of Chelmsford. Every year in September, the bishop would come and speak at an induction day for new curates. Curates is just what we call certain sorts of new ministers in the Church of England. And the bishop told them that half of their ministerial time should be spent outside the community of gathered church. Clergy, he said, aren't just chaplains to a congregation, but it's equally important that they have responsibility for the common good of the whole parish. It's the 50-50 principle. And the first year curates would nod intelligently. After all, he was the bishop, wasn't he? So in my first year in this new job, I went straight from this gathering of first year curates to a training session for third year curates.
Including me.
Including Caroline. And I told them the same thing, that they should spend about as much ministerial time outside the gathered congregation as they do within it. And they laughed.
I didn't laugh.
Well, you didn't laugh. No, it's like one of the stories in Genesis about Sarah. No, you didn't laugh, Caroline, but your cohort did. And when I
Okay,
asked them why they were laughing, they said the whole idea was ridiculous because they showed me their lists of faithful people to be visited and committees to be attended and services to be planned and led. And they told me they were not community organizers. They were pastors of God's gathered people and recruiters of others to join them. So, well, then it was the next year, and I'd been in the job for about a year, and again we ran an induction day, and again the bishop.
Well, he'll be an archbishop soon.
Yeah, that's right, the bishop, soon to be an archbishop, said exactly the same, but I rethought the induction so that we provided not just a vision for ministry that is both internal and external, but also gave tools to help the curates be more like community organizers and less like chaplains. And the first of the tools, and now we introduce it on the very first morning of their ministerial life, is the one-to-one. We spoke about one-to-ones in the last episode. A one-to-one is a 40-minute conversation or so where people both disclose a story that matters to them and their passions, the things they care about or hope for or dream of, and the other people who matter to them and the gifts they bring to the community. So now I promise the curates that if they do a one-to-one a week for 3 years, at the end of that time, they'll be the best connected people in their communities, including their vicars.
And like all the aspects of community organising that we're speaking about, this works both externally and internally, 50-50, like breathing in and breathing out. Externally, Christian leaders with a concern for the common good need to join or build alliances with like-minded organisations. Deaneries, circuits, dioceses, churches together, team ministries. Well, of course, those things, but also mosques and gurdwaras, synagogues, trade unions, universities, residents' associations, whoever we need to be working with in order to pool our power and bring about real change. As leaders join or form these alliances, they will quickly find that if the alliances are healthy, then there are assemblies where open invitation is offered, and the more the merrier, and there are teams where there's a limited membership and agreed roles. And they'll also discover that there are liturgies. For example, a team meeting may always start with a reflection on a theme and then move to rounds, going around the circle and giving everyone a chance to say who they are, what organisations they're part of, and perhaps answer a question or have a say before beginning with a more standard agenda.
And the same is true internally, because community organising isn't just about what we do outside gathered church, it's about how churches run as well. Internally, we need both teams and assemblies. We might call the teams PCCs or leadership teams or boards of elders, and we might call the assemblies services. There are routines and liturgies to be followed, like a threefold structure of the service of the word, or the way a particular tradition celebrates the Eucharist, or a way to hold a church council meeting. Maybe a church council is going to start with a Bible reading and some reflection on it, and then apologies for absence and minutes and matters arising and so on. The point is that liturgy happens in all sorts of places. And if a leader sees their role as that of a community organizer, they'll give particular attention to those liturgies because the community of the church will be being shaped by them. Over time, the number of people who don't just come to assemblies, services, but are part of teams with real responsibilities will start to increase.
So Andy, you used to be a vicar before your current role, and you claim that at one point you had 120 people in teams running the internal and external life of the church. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
How many people were in the church?
Average Sunday attendance was about 110 at that point.
So you had more people running the church than coming to church?
Yeah, that expresses it well, including about 13 people leading services and preaching, and a big pastoral care team, and volunteers helping people claim benefits and deal with debts and so on.
And if I can just pause you there for a minute, because actually I suspect a lot of leaders, whether they're vicars or ministers in other capacities or just leaders within a congregation, are thinking, well, actually, that sounds fantastic, but how do I get from where I am now to somewhere like that? How do you even start that process?
So I can't tell anyone else how to do it, but here is my patented, no, not patented at all, but here is my 5-step process that I used when I was Vicar of Gallywood. And I guess I started this fairly early in my time there, but then I was there for 12 years, so I had time to move through it. So step 1, a vacancy for a responsible person arose, either through one of the leaders resigning, and I always accepted resignations, or by me identifying part of my own job that I could fruitfully pass on or frankly wasn't gifted for. Incompetence is really helpful for church leaders. If you can't do that naturally, you might have to fake it a little bit. Second stage, autocracy. That is, I took control for a little bit. I used my own authority to redefine what the job entailed and make whatever decisions were urgent. And thirdly, I put together a flat team of equals who would work with me to achieve whatever the goal of the team was. But I made it clear at the first meeting that it wasn't my normal policy to chair this team for more than a month. So the team would need to work out between them who the chair would be, what style of leadership would they'd operate, sometimes a sort of rotating chair or a convener, sometimes something a little bit more decisive, but still collaborative. You get the idea. And at this stage, I found that the original leader of this ministry, when they discovered that there was now a whole team of people doing it, found that they could rejoin as a team member. That happened again and again, and why not? Fourth stage, a formal recognition of the new team, whether that was a PCC resolution or a public commissioning, something like that. And fifthly, I withdrew from regular attendance at the team meetings, though maybe still turning up from time to time, but I made sure I met periodically with the people chairing the teams, either formally or informally, for supervision and review. The whole 5 stages for any given role, I reckon that will take at least 6 months to get from one person does it all to a team of 5 do it in a collaborative way. Now, there are probably people listening to this podcast saying, I was at Gallywood, it didn't happen in anything like that unmessy a way, Andy. And you're absolutely right. Sorry about that. But it did kind of happen. And Caroline, I bet you've experienced similar, and I bet you're building something similar as well.
Yes, and it's not neat when you lay it out as a 5-step, and those were pretty much the steps that we followed, to be fair. When you lay it out as a 5-step, you have to neaten up the edges for the purposes of putting it down on paper and not confusing people. Because if you told the whole story in real time, it would just be like Spaghetti Junction. And people are people, and they're connected in all sorts of ways. But I mean, we found, for example, we had one lady who was absolutely tremendous, did so much for young people, was absolutely brilliant and fantastic. And then there were other people who wanted to start new things and did. And then there was another person who was really, really faithfully doing a Friday night youth group that was really successful. And all of those things were kind of happening. And at times they were struggling and at times they were flourishing, but they were all working in parallel rather than together. And then we had an issue where some things were clashing. And so these were almost competing strands. And we felt that it would be more fruitful. So I had conversations with the various people in the various roles, and basically pulled the whole thing under one umbrella and said, we're going to have a youth work team. And you're right, you have to kind of throw your authority around a little bit at the start to get everybody in the room. Say, okay, we're going to meet and we're going to find a time, we're going to get together and we're going to, sit. And actually I did it house meeting style. It was pre-lockdown. So we all sat in my living room and we just about had enough seating space. And we talked around the room. So we had a moment's reflection. We then went around the room and talked about the various bits of youth work we've been involved with and what we enjoyed and so on. And then we explored some ideas together about where we might go and how we might all work together, which ended with people saying what roles they would like to do. And the freedom of that is that actually, if you've held a role for a really long time, in the church, there tends to be this tendency that you say yes to a role and you are chained to it until you become a skeleton. Because that role is filled now and you are there for all eternity, amen. And then we wonder why people won't volunteer for things. And actually there's great power in saying, will you do this role for, and set a defined period of time. So we decided that we were going to do things a particular way for 6 months and then review. And so people know that whatever roles they're holding, they're going to hold for 6 months and then they're going to review it. And when we divided out the tasks, we discovered that actually people weren't going to be overwhelmed, because by the time you divide the tasks amongst a large team, actually not too much weight rests on one person's shoulders. And then you have the inevitable kind of backwards movement where the people who are used to carrying a heavy load feel weirdly light and slightly discombobulated. And they start to take a little bit back more on their shoulders again, or they think, oh, well, now I've got this free space, so I can cram in this or that extra. So you kind of have to watch that a little bit if you are used to being a positional leader and you've done that for a while. And you have to watch that as a positional leader, you don't squash other people who are growing up into leadership and are exploring new things. So a lot of it is about not getting in the way. But we did find that things started to be really fruitful. The all-age worship services were being led by different people. And it was fantastic for me to just be able to sit in the congregation with my teenagers, one on either side, and receive a service and literally do no part of it apart from to pray.
Absolutely right.
Be a member of the congregation. It was
absolutely
such a joy.
Right. And sometimes it fails completely. This should also be said. Sometimes we attempt to do that and it all doesn't work out and we have to pick it up again and do a different thing.
Oh yeah, that can happen too. And actually the incompetence thing you mentioned is quite important, because when I first arrived in Brightlingsea, I made a deliberate choice to not be very polished. and to not present it and not try and be perfect. One, because I was bound to screw it up sooner or later. And screw ups are always more horrifying if they're used to you being polished. But also because I wanted people to feel they could cross the line between congregation and leadership. And there is this kind of invisible, almost glowing line that it takes some courage to traverse in some churches. But actually, if you forget your sheet and instead of gliding across the sanctuary and bowing at an obscure saint and retrieving it surreptitiously, instead of doing that, if you just say, oh, I left my sheet over there, bear with me, and go and get it, then actually what you would gain after 6 months is a congregation of people thinking, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And actually that's quite a nice place to start from, is people feeling actually we can be relaxed together. And so we had a lady who led her first all-age service, and she was beautifully relaxed. It was wonderful.
Absolutely.
Feel this pressure to be somebody else or put on a different voice or become somebody else. She was herself, and it was just wonderful.
And of course, there will never be a better opportunity than this for Christian leaders to exercise a ministry of incompetence. Certainly technophobes like me, I have no idea what I'm doing with any of it. But it seems to me that the online sort of services and Zoom worship and so on that works best is where the person who's trying to run it is incompetent. The stuff where somebody is really good at it, that's terrifying. I would advise anyone in Christian leadership who is good at using this technology to think seriously about asking someone less good to operate it for the time being.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a place for centralized things that are smooth and relaxing for people to watch. You kind of expect that sort of output from a cathedral, for example.
Okay.
But your parishioners want something that feels real. They don't want something that's so over edited that it doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel like the real people that they know. Because actually the thing people need the most, I think, probably is that human connection. And, also, not going to lie, I love a little sneaky peek into people's houses. when they're all zooming in for a call, I think, oh, that's a pretty ornament. Oh, I like that picture.
Absolutely. One last thing on this, which is, please don't misunderstand what Caroline and I are saying, as saying that leaders need to sort of, relax their authority. The buck still stops with you if that's where it stops in normal times. And although I was constantly trying to build teams to do things and constantly trying to do myself out of various jobs, I once had to step in and fire the leader of a certain ministry who was a racist and say that they would never be exercising authority in that church again. There are times that there is never a good time to walk away. This is not about walking away from responsibility. It's about achieving participation from loads of people, both in teams and in assemblies, both internally and externally. It's about spreading ministry. You could put it this way, that Christian leaders don't feel like they have to do everything. They empower others to get things done. There's a line in a book by Stephen Cottrell that goes like this: good leaders build effective teams, things get done, people think they did it themselves, they're right. And I'm really glad to say some people have started writing to us to tell us their experiences at a distance. I'm at randomlyandy@live.com.
And I'm at revcarolinebeckett@gmail.com. And one person who's got in touch is Jen, who says, apocalypse means unveiling what's already there. Is this an apocalypse?
We do get a good class of question, don't we? Wow.
We certainly do.
Okay, so I'm trying to answer this as somebody who's promoting community organizing. So let me try and respond this way. It was Ed Chambers who coined the phrase that there is the world as it is, and there is the world as it should be. And Ed Chambers said that human beings have the vocation of standing in the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And then, of course, Barack Obama was the person that popularized the phrase. And he said that his job was to bridge the gap a little bit between the world as it is and the world as it should be. He was a great thinker for community organizing, except that there was this sort of deviation where he had to go off and do something else for about 8 years before he could come back and make a contribution to the community organizing world again. Anyway, if it's true that there is the world as it is and the world as it should be, Christians know that the world as it should be is God's world, God's realm, God's kingdom, if you like. When we're at a citizens' meeting and people are using the language of the world as it is and the world as it should be, we don't sort of wade on in there and say, oh, actually, could you call that the kingdom of God, please? Because that's not an appropriate way to behave in a public meeting. But we know that's what we mean. And it is amazing when a little bit of the kingdom of God, of the world as it should be, is revealed. One day, God is going to put the world to rights, and the whole world will be the world as it should be. Heaven and earth will kiss and be one. Meanwhile, we can do a little now in order to achieve in this world what God's dream of the world to come, the world as it should be, the kingdom of God is. And God isn't stepping back and saying, right, people, I want you to get on with that. God is the one who is at work with whom we are cooperating.
Mm. And when we think about revealing, apocalypse doesn't only reveal the world as it should be, it also reveals the world as it is. And for some people that's been quite a shaking and negative experience, because it's revealed really not a very pleasant side of some of us or of society and how society works, and that's been very bruising for some people. But it has also revealed this really thick, deep vein of generosity and creativity and courage and determination in people. And I'm willing to bet, I'm not usually a betting woman, but I'm willing to bet that over half of our population have thought more about their neighbours in the last month than they have in the preceding few years. We are really starting to think geographically about who's around us because we're in lockdown, and it is altering perspective, and it's also calling out of people a care and a concern for others. So I think it's not all bleak. I think it is a bit of a crucible. I think it is a testing time. But I do really, really want to avoid that. There's been some seriously bad theology out there that says God has sent the coronavirus as a test for us. Are we passing or failing? No, just no. That is really so unhelpful. I can't even begin to say how unhelpful that is. And then there are those who say, well, God sent the coronavirus as a judgment. And again, nope, big fat nope, that is really, really not helpful. And yet, what we do believe as Christians is that good is stronger than evil, love is stronger than hate, light is stronger than darkness, and therefore whatever happens, because the world is a broken place and bad stuff happens to good people, and the Bible's really clear on that. In fact, the one promise Jesus makes to his followers is, in this world you will have trouble, but he adds, take heart, for I have overcome the world. And there is nothing in all of the horrible things that are going on that God cannot bring some light, some good, and some love out of. Otherwise, God wouldn't be God. So the things that are growing and shining and springing up are wonderful things. And yet it's still a struggle. It's still really difficult. And there are really dark days when people feel really beaten down. And actually, that's normal. And so we need to, I think, be a little bit resistant of some of these bad theologies around the apocalypse. But there's equally some really good thinking and good theology coming out around what's being revealed about us as a nation and as people. One of the things that's being revealed in the shakedown of the church, as we explored a little bit in another broadcast, is how connected we are to our buildings and our rituals and the things that we have given meaning to. And actually, who are we without some of those things? And one of the debates that's been going on amongst some clergy, particularly in the Anglican tradition, although this might apply elsewhere about other things, is that in a lot of our churches we have a lamp that is never put out. And it symbolises that the light of God is always burning, that God is always present, that God is always watching. And one of the sorrows for some people is that when the churches have been shut, those lamps have gone out because they've not been tended. And that has been a real grief that has been quite symbolic of things. And so I'm going to do my typical thing and add a poem into the mix. And this is a poem about that. I never dreamed in darkest dreams that I would ever see the day, the ever-burning lamp, whose beams in church should never fade away, would sputter to a lonely end, in echoes and locked emptiness. And yet the light's not gone, my friend, but transferred to my eye, more blessed. In each eye that I look upon, its light is kindled there from mine, the light of hope, the light of Christ. Through eyes of faith I see it shine. Though we can light no candles now to mark our prayers the usual way, the light we pass from eye to eye burns like the dawning of the day. We pass it on, in smiles or tears, for teardrops cleanse the lantern's face, and it shines brighter still for that, while smiles become our silent praise. So in the dark time of our fear, we need not fear to meet the eye of one in suffering. We have here a light to meet their Maker by. When shadowed vale turns to bright field, and shuttered church flings wide its doors for tears and praise, and bells are pealed, and candles blaze to wild applause, and all the faithful gather, light with the fresh dawnings of new grace, we will restore, from eyes still bright, the lamplight once more to its place.
Beautiful. Next
and there is
time,
always a balance, isn't there? There's always that balance between the light outside and the light inside.
absolutely. Next time we're going to be talking about listening. So do join us for that one. But for the moment, we've been
both at a distance,
rethinking Christian leadership.